After my tests for my so-called mystery illness, the nurse slipped a letter into my purse. "Madam, run from your family now." I froze instantly. But that night I realized she had saved my life and 20 cops are dragging my Dill away. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My world had begun to fade, its vibrant, complex chemistry bleeding out into a uniform, confusing gray. For the past year my life had been defined not by the elegant precision of the periodic table, but by the chaotic uncertainty of a so-called mystery illness. My name is Dr. Helen Reed. For 40 years as a professor of chemistry I had believed that every effect had a traceable cause, every problem an elegant solution, but now at 69 my own body had become an unsolvable riddle, a rogue experiment gone horribly wrong. The illness had come on like a slow, creeping fog. It started with a fatigue so profound it felt like I was walking through water. Then came the tremors in my hands. A cruel mockery for a woman who had once calibrated the most delicate of instruments. And finally the most terrifying symptom of all, the memory lapses, the terrifying blank spaces in my own mind where thoughts and words used to be. My beautiful stately home in Shaker Heights, a place once filled with books and music and the joyful chaos of scientific discovery, had become a quiet, carpeted prison where I was too afraid to even use the stove. My son Jonathan, a brilliant corporate lawyer with a heart as good as gold, was wrecked with a grief and guilt that was painful to watch. He saw his mother, a woman who had debated quantum theory at international conferences, struggling to remember the name of her own street. It was breaking his heart. And then there was Monique, my daughter-in-law, my angel. When my illness had first taken a serious turn, she had, without a moment's hesitation, put her own career as a pharmaceutical sales rep on hold to become my full-time caregiver. She was the star around which our tragic little solar system now revolved. She was beautiful, tirelessly patient, and relentlessly, suffocatingly attentive. "Now, Helen, did you take your morning vitamins?" she would ask, her voice a smooth, sweet melody of concern. She prepared all my meals herself, a series of special nutritional smoothies and broths designed, she claimed, to combat inflammation and boost my immune system. She managed my medications, my appointments, my entire existence. She was, as my son Jonathan told me at least once a day, a saint, a blessing, the only light in this dark, confusing time. I would nod and agree, because what else could I do? But in the deepest, most secret corners of my clouded mind, a small dissenting voice, the ghost of the logical, analytical woman I used to be, would whisper that something was wrong. Her care was too perfect, her sympathy was too polished, but I would push the thought away, chiding myself for my own paranoia, a symptom, the doctors had said, that could sometimes accompany my condition. The day my world finally snapped into sharp, terrifying focus began like any other in my long, slow fade. It was a Tuesday, the day of another battery of inconclusive tests at the Cleveland Clinic. The process was a familiar humiliation. I was poked, prodded, and scanned, my body a specimen under the bright, unforgiving lights of modern medicine. Monique was a whirlwind of efficiency, answering questions for me when I faltered, her hand always on my arm, a steadying, controlling presence. Jonathan hovered in the background, his face a mask of anxious misery. The doctors, as usual, were baffled. They spoke of rare autoimmune disorders, of atypical neurological decline. They scheduled more tests for the following week. The cycle of hope and disappointment was the only predictable rhythm left in my life. As we were preparing to leave, a young nurse came to help me into my wheelchair. She was new, someone I hadn't seen before. Her name tag read, Aisha Nandia. She was a tall, graceful woman with intelligent, observant eyes that seemed to see more than the other nurses. While Monique was speaking with the doctor down the hall, Aisha leaned down to adjust the blanket on my lap. Her movements were swift and professional, but her hand lingered for a fraction of a second on my purse, which was sitting beside me. It was a quick, almost imperceptible movement, but I felt it. A small folded piece of paper slipped with a breathtaking practice stealth into the open side pocket. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. In her gaze I saw something that cut through the fog in my mind like a flash of lightning. It was not pity, it was fear. A profound, desperate and urgent fear. And it was directed at me. She put a single, elegant finger to her lips in a silent, universal gesture for secrecy, then straightened up, her expression once again a mask of professional calm. Just as Monique returned to the room. The car ride home was a blur, Monique and Jonathan sat in the front, their conversation a low murmuring drone about medical bills and future appointments. I sat in the back, my heart a frantic wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs. The small folded letter in my purse felt as heavy as a stone, a dangerous forbidden object. My mind raced. Had I imagined it? Was this another symptom of my supposed paranoia? A hallucination born of a sick mind? But the look in the nurse's eyes, that had been real. The weight of the paper in my purse was real. When we arrived home, Monique helped me to my room, her touch as gentle and as possessive as ever. "You just rest now, Helen," she cooed. "You've had a long day. I'll bring your afternoon smoothie in a little while." The moment she closed the door, I fumbled for my purse. My hands, which had been plagued by tremors for months, were surprisingly steady. I pulled out the small folded piece of paper. It was a piece of a prescription pad, the paper cheap and thin. The words were written in a neat, hurried script. They were terrifying, cryptic, and utterly insane. "Madam, run from your family now." Underneath, in smaller, even more frantic letters, was a phone number. I stared at the words, my blood turning to ice in my veins. It made no sense. It was the stuff of cheap thrillers, of paranoid fantasies. Run? I could barely walk to the bathroom on my own. Run from Jonathan, my loving, heartbroken son? From Monique, my tireless, sainted caregiver? It was absurd. But the look in the nurse's eyes, the sheer animal terror, it haunted me. I, a woman of science, was faced with a conflict of data. On one hand, I had a year of evidence of my family's loving care. On the other, I had a single powerful and deeply unsettling data point. The look in Aisha's eyes. That night, lying in the darkness of my room, my mind a churning sea of fear and confusion, I decided to do what I had always done when faced with an unsolvable problem. I decided to conduct an experiment. The daily smoothies Monique prepared for me were the one constant in my decline. They were the one variable that had been introduced into my life at the same time my symptoms had begun. Hypothesis. The smoothies are the cause of my illness. Experiment. Do not drink the smoothie. Observe the results. It was a simple, logical plan, and it was the most terrifying decision of my life. If I was wrong, I was a paranoid, ungrateful old woman who was succumbing to the very madness my family feared. But if I was right, then I was living in a house with a monster. The next evening, at precisely 6 o'clock, Monique entered my room, a cheerful smile on her face. In her hand, she held a tall, frosty glass filled with a thick, green liquid. My nutritional smoothie. It was a concoction of kale, spinach, and what she called a special blend of adaptogenic herbs. It always had a slightly bitter, earthy aftertaste that I had grown to associate with my own slow, steady decline. "Here you go, Helen," she said, her voice bright and encouraging. "Drink this all up. It'll give you your strength back." She placed the glass on my bedside table, along with a straw. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. This was the moment of truth. My hands, I noticed with a strange detached sense of pride, were trembling. It was the one symptom of my illness that I could now use to my advantage. I reached for the glass, my fingers fumbling, my movements exaggeratedly clumsy. "Oh, thank you, dear," I said, my voice a weak, quavering thing. "I'm just so clumsy today." As I brought the glass toward me, I let my hand jerk, as if a sudden violent tremor had seized me. The glass tilted, and a significant portion of the thick green liquid sloshed over the side, spilling onto my duvet, the nightstand, and the plush white carpet. "Oh dear," I cried out, my voice a pitch-perfect imitation of a flustered, helpless old woman. "Oh my goodness, look at the mess I've made. I am so sorry." Monique's reaction was instantaneous. A flash of something pure, unadulterated fury passed through her eyes for a fraction of a second before it was immediately replaced by her usual mask of patient, weary concern. "It's all right, Helen. It's all right," she sighed. A martyr to my incompetence. "Don't you worry. I'll go get some cleaning supplies. Just try not to make it worse." The moment she bustled out of the room, her back rigid with controlled annoyance, I moved, with a speed and a precision I hadn't possessed in months. I grabbed the glass, I hobbled into my private ensuite bathroom and dumped the remaining contents of the smoothie down the sink. The thick green sludge gurgled away, a silent venomous snake disappearing into the drains. But I did not rinse the glass. At the very bottom, a small undiluted puddle remained. I quickly unscrewed the lid of an old empty jar of cold cream that I had cleaned out weeks ago. I carefully poured the last of the smoothie into the jar and sealed it tight. I then rinsed the glass, my hands shaking with adrenaline, and placed it back on the bedside table. I was back in my bed looking frail and apologetic, a full 30 seconds before Monique returned, armed with a roll of paper towels and a bottle of carpet cleaner. That night, for the first time in a year, I had not consumed the daily smoothie. I endured a difficult, restless night, my body craving the substance it had grown accustomed to, my mind a battlefield of hope and terror. But when I woke the next morning, as the pale, watery light of dawn filtered through my window, I felt a profound, unmistakable difference. It was not a miracle, it was not a sudden cure. But the thick, suffocating fog that had been clouding my mind for so long, the fog that had made every thought a struggle, had lifted, just slightly. It was as if a heavy, weighted blanket had been partially removed, allowing me to breathe, to think for the first time in months. I could follow a complete thought from beginning to end without losing my way. I looked at my hands, the constant fine tremor was still there, but it was noticeably less severe. The clarity was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was the exhilarating clarity of a prisoner who has just found a crack in the wall of her cell, and it was the terrifying clarity of a woman who now knew with absolute scientific certainty that her illness was not in her body, it was in the glass that her loving daughter-in-law handed her every single day. The nurse was right, and my life was in mortal danger. The scientist in me, the retired professor who had been sedated and silenced for a year, awoke with a vengeance. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach, but it was now accompanied by a surge of pure, cold, intellectual fury. I had been a subject in a monstrous, unsanctioned experiment, and now I was taking control of the lab. I needed data. I needed to identify the substance in the smoothie. My mind, now blessedly clearer, began to tick through my old contacts. Dr. Aris Thorne. He had been my most brilliant graduate student, a man with a genius for toxicology. He now ran his own private, high-end analytical lab in Cleveland, a place that catered to corporations and law firms that needed discreet, rush job analyses. But I couldn't call him from the house phone. I couldn't use my own cell phone. I had no doubt that Monique, with her meticulous, controlling nature, monitored everything. But a good scientist, like a good detective, always has a contingency plan. In the back of my closet, tucked away in an old shoebox, was my emergency burner phone, a cheap prepaid device I had kept for years, a relic of a time when I'd imagined needing it for a natural disaster, not a domestic one. I retrieved the phone, my movements still furtive and cautious. I dialed Aris's private number, a number I had memorized years ago. He answered on the second ring, his voice as sharp and as precise as I remembered. "Dr. Thorne, Aris," I said, my voice a low, urgent whisper. "It's Helen Reed." There was a moment of shocked, pleased surprise. "Professor Reed, my God, it's been years. How are you?" "I'm not well, Aris," I said, cutting to the chase. "And I need your help. I need it fast, and I need it to be completely off the books. I have a water sample from a home garden. I suspect it's been contaminated with some kind of organic compound. I need a full toxicological breakdown, and I need it yesterday." He was a scientist, not a detective. He didn't ask why his former professor was whispering on a strange number about a contaminated water sample. He heard the urgency in my voice, the unspoken plea, and he trusted the woman who had mentored him. "Of course, Professor," he said, his voice all business now. "My lab offers a confidential courier service. Give me the address. I'll have someone there within the hour. They'll be discreet. The preliminary results should be ready in 24 hours. I gave him the address of a neutral location, a small independent coffee shop 2 blocks from my house. The next challenge was getting the sample to the courier without arousing suspicion. I told Monique I was feeling a bit stronger and wanted to try a short walk in the garden. She agreed, her eyes full of that familiar pitying indulgence, as if she were allowing a toddler a few moments of supervised play. I wrapped the small cosmetics jar in a handkerchief, tucked it into the pocket of my cardigan, and slowly, deliberately walked out my front door. The short 2-block journey felt like a marathon, but I made it. I handed off the small, precious package to a discreet, professional-looking courier, my heart pounding with the thrill of my own clandestine operation. I was back in my room, my feigned exhaustion a perfect cover when the burner phone vibrated in my pocket. It was the number from the note. I answered, my heart in my throat. "Dr. Reed?" a young woman's voice asked, low and cautious. "It's Aisha, Aisha Nanaye, the nurse from the clinic." The breath left my lungs. How did you get this number? I whispered. I'm resourceful, she said, a hint of steel in her voice. And I was worried. Dr. Reed, I had to call. I'm a nurse. I took an oath, and what I saw, it wasn't right. She began to speak, her words a torrent of professional validation for my deepest fears. Your blood work, she explained. It was a mess, but it wasn't a random mess. There were specific markers, elevated liver enzymes, suppressed white blood cell counts, that didn't fit any of the diseases they were testing for. But they did fit a pattern of chronic, low-level toxicity. And then there was your daughter-in-law. Aisha described Monique's behavior at the hospital. Behavior that had set off every one of her professional alarm bells. She told me how Monique had hovered over the phlebotomist, questioning every vial of blood he drew. She told me how during a previous visit she had walked in on Monique in Helen's private bathroom, standing near the urine sample cup with a small vial of clear liquid in her hand. A vial she had quickly hidden when she saw Aisha. She claimed she was just adding a preservative. Aisha said, her voice full of disgust. But that's not our procedure. She was trying to contaminate the sample, to dilute it, to hide something. I reported it to my supervisor, but they dismissed it as the actions of an over-anxious family member. But I knew. I'm from Senegal. My grandmother was a village healer. I know about plants. I know about poisons that mimic illness. I knew I had to warn you. Even if it meant risking my job, my career. Her story, her courage was a confirmation and a lifeline. I was not alone in this. I had an ally, a brave, intelligent, and resourceful ally. The final, damning piece of the puzzle arrived the next afternoon. The burner phone rang. It was Eris. His voice was grim, devoid of all pleasantries. Helen, he said, his tone low and serious. Where did you get this sample? Just tell me what's in it, Eris, I said, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. He took a deep breath. It's colchicine, he said, a highly concentrated, methodical dose. It's a toxic alkaloid, usually derived from the autumn crocus plant. In its pure form, it's a deadly poison, but in small sustained amounts, administered over a long period of time. He paused, his voice heavy with the weight of his discovery. In small sustained amounts, it's a diabolical mimic. It attacks the nervous system, the digestive tract, the bone marrow. It perfectly replicates the symptoms of a severe chronic and utterly untraceable neurological disorder. I, with my own background in chemistry and botany, understood the full, horrifying intelligence of the plan. This was not a crude, common poison. This was a bespoke, artisanal method of murder, chosen by someone with a deep professional knowledge of pharmacology. Someone like a former pharmaceutical sales rep. The pieces of the puzzle didn't just fit, they locked together with a sickening final click. The fear was still there, but now it was a cold, hard, and strangely empowering thing. I was no longer a victim. I was an investigator with a confirmed cause of death, a reliable witness, and a suspect. The next call I made was not one of fear, but one of grim, righteous purpose. I looked up the number for the homicide division of the Cleveland Police Department. I asked for the head of the unit, a man I didn't know, but I knew his type, and I knew how to talk to him. My call was transferred and a new voice, a deep, no-nonsense baritone answered. Detective Wallace. Detective, I said, my own voice changing, shedding the frail tones of the sick old woman and taking on the crisp, authoritative cadence of my past. My name is Dr. Helen Reed. I am a retired professor of chemistry, and I would like to report a conspiracy to commit murder. My own. There was a moment of weary, skeptical silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him perfectly. A tired, overworked cop who had heard 1,000 crazy stories. Ma'am, he began, his voice full of a patronizing patience. I cut him off. I have a toxicology report from a private lab confirming a systematic poisoning with colchicine, I said, my voice sharp and clear. I have a sworn witness, a registered nurse from the Cleveland Clinic, who is prepared to testify about evidence tampering. And I have a suspect who is currently living in my house, and who is planning to have me involuntarily committed as a prelude to murdering my son and stealing his fortune. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Now, detective, do I have your attention? There was another silence. But this one was different. It was the silence of a professional who had just realized this was not another crank call. This was real. Yes, Mom, he said, his voice now stripped of all condescension, replaced by a focused professional intensity. You do? The alliance was forged in that single phone call. Detective Wallace, a seasoned, old-school cop, was initially understandably skeptical. But as I methodically laid out my case, speaking his language, the language of evidence, motive and opportunity, his skepticism melted away, replaced by a grim professional interest. I wasn't a hysterical old woman, I was a source, and I was a credible one. The final piece of persuasion was Aisha. I arranged a conference call on the burner phone. Her testimony was a masterpiece of professional observation and quiet courage. She calmly detailed the anomalies in my blood work, the inconsistencies in Monique's behavior, the attempted tampering with the urine sample. She was a medical professional, a calm, factual, and unimpeachable witness. By the time she was finished, Detective Wallace was no longer just interested, he was hooked. "All right, Dr. Reed," he said, a new respect in his voice. "We're in. But we have to do this smart. Your daughter-in-law is clever. We can't just knock on the door. We need to catch her in the act. We need a confession." And so the trap was set. The plan we devised was a dangerous high-wire act. A piece of theater with the highest possible stakes. Detective Wallace and his tech expert arrived at the house the next afternoon, disguised as technicians from the internet company, there to upgrade the home's fiber optic network. Jonathan was at work. Monique, ever the gracious lady of the house, let them in, completely unsuspecting. She watched them with a bored, dismissive air as they moved through the house, opening panels and checking connections. While the tech expert pretended to work on the main router in Robert's office, he was actually sweeping the house for listening devices, confirming my suspicion that Monique was likely monitoring my calls. He found a tiny sophisticated bug in the base of the phone in my room. Then he and Wallace moved to the kitchen. Their stated purpose was to install a new air quality monitor, a gift they claimed from the company for our patients. The device was a small, sleek white box which Wallace placed on a high shelf, ostensibly to get the best air circulation. In reality, it was a state-of-the-art surveillance unit, containing a pinhole camera and a high-fidelity microphone, all wirelessly connected to a secure police server. The trap was now baited and set. The final, most difficult part of the plan was up to me. I had to perform. I had to become the person Monique believed me to be. A confused, deteriorating old woman, teetering on the edge of a complete mental collapse. The next 24 hours were the most grueling of my life. I had to actively fight against my own returning clarity, to force myself to stammer, to seem confused by simple questions, to spill a glass of water at dinner. Each act of feigned incompetence was a stab of humiliation, but I held on to my purpose. I was not just acting, I was luring a predator. The performance was so convincing it broke my own son's heart. That evening, as Monique was in the kitchen preparing my nightly tea, Jonathan came into my room. He sat on the edge of my bed, his face a mask of profound, helpless grief. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Monique told me about the doctor's call, about the facility. I don't want this for you. But she says you're not safe here anymore. I saw you in the garden today talking to the roses. You seemed so lost." I had been rehearsing my lines for the hidden camera, a fact I could not tell him. I had to let him believe it. It was the cruelest, most necessary lie I had ever told. I looked at my beautiful, heartbroken son, his face a mirror of my own pain, and I had to let him believe his mother was losing her mind. It was a unique and terrible form of torture. "It's all right, baby," I whispered, patting his hand. "Your wife, she'll take care of me. She always does." He squeezed my hand, a single tear rolling down his cheek, and left the room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The bait had been taken, Monique had won. Or so she thought. The morning of the confrontation arrived with a sense of dreadful, inevitable finality. This was the day she planned to have me committed. The day her endgame would be set in motion. The air in the house was thick with unspoken tension. I woke before dawn, my nerves stretched as tight as piano wire, but my mind was a block of ice. I went through the motions of my morning, a silent, grim preparation for the battle to come. At 7 a.m. I heard the familiar sound of the water starting in the master bathroom shower. The sound was my starting gun. Chantel would be in there for at least 15 minutes. It was time. My movements were swift and silent, the skills of a lifetime on the force returning as if they had never left. I slipped out of my room and down the hall to the master suite. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and slid inside, my heart pounding a deafening rhythm in my ears. The sound of the shower, a steady percussive hiss, covered any small noise I might make. The first part of my plan was pure psychological warfare. I wasn't just presenting evidence, I was shattering her sense of control, her belief that she was the smartest person in the room. I walked over to the pristine white towel warmer. On it a thick fluffy bath towel was heating, waiting for the queen of the house to emerge from her shower. I took the towel off the rack. In its place, I took out the 8x10 glossy photograph I had printed from my burner phone using a 24-hour photo service in town the day before. It was a crystal-clear close-up shot of the prescription bottle of olanzapine, its damning label perfectly legible. I used a piece of clear tape to affix it directly to the center of the large fog-free vanity mirror, right at her eye level. It was the first thing she would see when she stepped out of the shower. Then, for the final personal touch, I reached into the pocket of my robe. I pulled out the tube of expensive blood-red lipstick I had seen on her vanity during my earlier search. I uncapped it. On the mirror directly below the photograph I scrawled two simple, powerful words in a large, messy script designed to look both angry and unhinged. The script of a woman on the edge. I know. I placed the lipstick on the counter, stepped back to admire my work, and then slipped out of the room as silently as I had entered. The first phase of the trap was set. The bait was laid. Now I just had to wait for the target to emerge. I went to the kitchen and began the slow, deliberate process of making coffee. The aroma filled the sterile air, a comforting normal scent in a world that was anything but. I had to create a scene of perfect domestic normalcy. My hands were steady as I measured the grounds. My breathing was even. On the outside I was a calm, slightly frail old woman. On the inside I was a hunter waiting in the blind. I needed Robert out of the house. The confrontation had to be between me and Chantel, alone. I called him on the house intercom, my voice a little shaky, a little weak, all part of the performance. "Robert, honey," I said, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I have a terrible craving for one of those almond croissants from that little French bakery you love. Would you be a dear and go pick some up for us?" There was a groggy pause. "Sure, Mom," he finally said, his voice thick with sleep. "I'll go in a few minutes." Perfect. He would be gone for at least half an hour. A few minutes later the shower in the master bathroom stopped. I heard the slide of the glass door. The silence that followed was a taut, stretched thing. I could imagine the scene perfectly. Chantel wrapped in a towel stepping out into the steam-filled room, her mind on her plan for the day, and then the frozen moment of discovery, the sight of the photograph, the two red words screaming at her from the mirror. The silence was broken by a sharp, strangled cry of pure rage, then the sound of something shattering, the lipstick tube being swept off the counter. I heard a string of vicious, ugly curses. Words I had never heard her utter, her footsteps no longer the graceful glide of the lady of the house, but the heavy, furious stomps of a cornered animal, thundered down the hallway. She burst into the kitchen, her face a terrifying mask of fury. Her beautiful, composed features were twisted with hate. She was wearing a silk robe, hastily thrown on, her wet hair plastered to her skull. The perfect, charming angel was gone. In her place was a monster. "You meddling old fool," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous snarl. She stalked toward me, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "What have you done?" I turned from the coffee maker, my expression one of carefully crafted, fearful confusion. This was the most important performance of my life. "Chantel dear, what is it?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "You've frightened me." "Don't you play dumb with me," she spat, her eyes burning with a cold black fire. "The picture, the note. What is it you think you know?" I let my gaze drop to the floor, as if in shame. "I overheard you, Chantel," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know about the medication, I know about the plan to have me committed today, and I know you plan to get rid of Robert." As I spoke, as I laid out my knowledge in the meekest voice I could muster, I subtly, almost imperceptibly, gave my secret voice command. My words were a shield, a cover for the real action. "It's a shame the weather isn't nicer," I said, my voice full of a non sequitur meant to sound like the ramblings of a confused mind. "The sun's gonna shine in my back door someday." In the corner of the kitchen, on the sleek smart hub mounted on the wall, a tiny, almost invisible blue light blinked once. The recording was live. My apparent weakness, my seeming confusion was the final catalyst Chantel needed, believing she was in a simple battle of wills, with a senile old woman who had stumbled onto a piece of a puzzle she couldn't possibly comprehend. She dropped her facade completely, all the pent-up rage, all the arrogance of a predator who believed she was about to close in for the kill, came pouring out. She laughed. It was a sound I will never forget. A cold, cruel, and utterly mirthless sound that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. "You know," she sneered, taking a step closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "You don't know anything. You're a confused old woman with a photograph. You think that pathetic little picture is proof of anything. You have nothing." She began to pace the kitchen, a caged tiger exulting in her own power, her every word a confession, her every admission captured in high-definition video and audio. "Let me tell you what's going to happen today, Essie. In about an hour, Dr. Miller from the psychiatric facility is going to arrive. I called him last night, after you wandered into the garden. I told him you'd become violent and paranoid, that you were making wild accusations. Your little stunt in my bathroom this morning, it's the perfect confirmation. You're the star witness for your own committal." My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my face a mask of terrified confusion. This was a new, horrifying twist. She was going to have me committed too. "And Robert," she continued, her eyes glittering with a sociopathic pride. "Oh, my dear, sweet, confused Robert is a mess. I've spent months carefully cultivating this. His partners at his firm, his friends, his doctor, they all think he's on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown. They've been getting worried calls from his loving, terrified wife for months. So when he has his breakdown today, when he starts screaming that I'm trying to poison him, a story you've no doubt planted in his head, everyone will believe me. They'll see a tragic textbook case of a man who has lost his mind." She stopped pacing and leaned in close, her face inches from mine, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And once you're gone and he's put away, safely in a facility where he can't manage his own affairs, his loving wife will have full power of attorney, and then, a tragic accident, an overdose of his prescribed medication, a terrible unforeseen complication. Everyone will mourn, everyone will pity the poor, beautiful widow, and Julian and I will have a very, very comfortable life on your son's fortune. It's the perfect plan, and you stupid old woman, you can't do a single thing to stop it." She had laid it all out. The entire monstrous, diabolical plan delivered with the arrogant pride of a master criminal. She was so sure of her own brilliance, so convinced of my weakness that she had just delivered a full signed confession. I let her finish. I let the last of her venomous words hang in the air. I looked at her, at the monster my son had married, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. "You're right," I said, my voice suddenly clear and steady, all traces of fear and confusion gone. "I didn't have proof." I paused, holding her gaze. "But I do now." I looked past her to the smart hub on the wall. My voice was crisp, clear, and full of the authority I had not used in years. "Computer, end recording. Send file Chantal's confession to Robert Jones Jr. and to my emergency contact Detective Usha Washington, HPD. The smart hub in its pleasant, automated female voice replied instantly. "Action complete. File sent." The color, the life, the arrogant certainty drained from Chantal's face. It was a slow, horrifying dawning, the look of a master chess player who has just realized they have been led into a trap and have been in checkmate for the last 5 moves. Her eyes darted from my face to the smart hub, the tiny blue light now off. She understood. Her perfect private confession had just been broadcast to the 2 people who could destroy her. At that exact moment, we heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Robert was home with the pastries. His phone, I knew, would be chiming with a notification for a new large video file. At the same moment, another sound, a distant but rapidly approaching siren, pierced the quiet suburban morning. My old friend and colleague, Detective Washington, was a woman who took emergency contacts very seriously. Chantal stood frozen for a single paralyzed second. Then her survival instinct took over. She whirled around and made a desperate, frantic run for the back door. For the sprawling, manicured lawn that led to the woods beyond. The grieving widow, the triumphant heiress. It was all gone. All that was left was a common criminal, fleeing the scene of the crime. But there was nowhere left to run. The trap had been sprung, and the cage she had so carefully built for my son and me had just become her own. The aftermath was a maelstrom of flashing lights, sober-faced police officers, and the quiet, efficient dismantling of Chantal's world. She was apprehended before she even reached the back fence, a snarling, terrified animal deprived of her finery. Julian Blackwood was picked up an hour later at his downtown office, a slick, handsome man whose composure crumbled the moment he was shown the video of Chantal's confession. Robert sat at the kitchen table, a half-eaten almond croissant forgotten in his hand, his face a pale, ghostly mask of shock and horror. He had watched the video on his phone in the driveway, had seen and heard the woman he loved calmly and cheerfully detailing her plan to destroy and murder him. The chemical fog he had been living in for months was no match for the brutal, clarifying slap of the truth. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, terrible understanding of what I had done, of the danger I had faced for him, alone, in his own home. The months that followed were a painful, necessary period of healing and reconstruction. The legal case against Chantal and Julian was swift and decisive. The digital confession was irrefutable. They turned on each other immediately, their sociopathic partnership dissolving into a messy flurry of accusations and blame. They were both facing long prison sentences. The Wallace fortune, the prize for which they had been willing to kill, was secure. But the real work was with Robert. The detox from the medication was a brutal physical and psychological ordeal. He had to confront the reality that his mind, his greatest asset, had been methodically hijacked. He had to grieve for the woman he thought he had married, a woman who had never truly existed. It was a long, dark road, but he did not have to walk it alone. I didn't go back to Chicago. I sold my condo and moved to Houston permanently, into a small sunny apartment not far from Robert's house. The Gilded Cage, once a place of terror, was slowly being transformed back into a home. We worked together, Robert and I, to reclaim it. We changed the locks, reprogrammed the smart home system, and filled the silent, minimalist rooms with new furniture, warm colors, and the sound of jazz music. Our relationship was reforged in the fire of that terrible time. The condescending concern was gone, replaced by a deep, profound respect. He saw me not as an aging mother to be managed, but as the woman who had saved his life, and I saw him not as a victim but as a survivor, a man strong enough to face the ugliest of truths and begin the hard work of healing. One evening several months later, we were sitting on his now peaceful patio, the scent of jasmine in the air. The smart home, once my weapon, was now just a convenience, playing a soft Miles Davis tune in the background. I had been teaching Robert how to play poker, an old trick from my detective days for learning how to read a person's tells, their unconscious signals of deception. He looked at the cards in his hand, then at me, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. "You know, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "I think I'm finally starting to see it, the little flicker of the eye, the way someone holds their breath when they're bluffing." I smiled back, a genuine, warm smile. "It's all about observation, honey," I said. "It's about seeing what's really there, not just what you want to see." He nodded, placing his cards on the table. He had a winning hand. He looked at me, his eyes clear and full of a love and a gratitude that needed no words. He was healing. He was safe. And I, Esther Jones, the retired detective, the mother, the survivor, had closed the most important case of my life. The sun was finally shining in my back door, and it was here to stay.